Good morning. This is Tylena Goy on Usala Media. This is Rise and Thrive. And today my guest is Lance Richmond. Lance Richmond is the board vice chair of the American Indian Community House in New York City. He is a founding member of the Silver Cloud Singers and a member of the Thunderbird American Indian Dancers. Lance co-wrote and directed the short film It Can't Rain All the Time, which addresses the issues of suicide, alcoholism, and substance abuse among Native American youth. He also directed and produced the documentary, A Traditional Kind of Women, a collection of stories that address health issues facing Native American women. Lance graduated from the University of Connecticut with a degree in political science. He currently works as IT manager at Columbia University. Lance, hi.
Hey, good morning.
Hello. Thank you so much for taking the time
No, of course.
To chat with us today. I just have so many things I want to talk to you about.
Great, that'll help.
So let's start.
Sure.
So can you maybe do your own intro and tell us where you're from, where you grew up?
Sure. So I'm the son of David Richmond and Rosemary Martin, who were from Akwesasne. I was born in Greenwich, though. They were both living in that area. In fact, my mother's family lived in that area going back to the 30s or maybe even longer. I should also say I'm also the stepson of Trudy Lamb Richmond, who's Scotticoke. So early on, I think when I was about 4 or 5, we moved into the city from Greenwich. We first stayed with Louis Mossy in Fort Lee, and I have some memories of that. But then quickly moved into the Mohawk community in Brooklyn on State Street, which in the 50s and 60s, when there was a lot of buildings, the market was really up. There was over 200 Mohawk families within a few blocks radius. And that was very all centered around the union hall for iron workers. So it just sort of started. And there was, you probably know this, but there was churches that gave services in Mohawk. The stores and bars around the area would, cater to Mohawks with the, food, stuff, staples that they would normally get that they didn't have, they would stock for that. And then I think by the time I got there, it wasn't that many families, but I know the building I lived in was 5 stories, 20 apartments, was all Mohawk and Mohawk owned. And gradually as I grew up, it got less and less people. And then when I left there in 2010, and I should say it was the price, it was rent stabilized. Is that where it only goes up a little every 2 years? So, it was a huge 1-bedroom apartment, 12-foot ceilings.
Wow.
And when I left in 2010, it was only $700 a month.
So, why would you leave?
Well, there were issues with the owner. Obviously, the people who owned it, everyone else is paying like $2,300. Yeah. So they didn't do any work. And it was, my mother was also retired from the community house. And I thought she had some health issues. Mm-hmm. So I thought we needed to live together. And buying a house was something that was mine. I didn't have to worry about a lease coming every 2 years, knowing that they didn't want me to be there. So I bought a house in Norwalk, where my aunt lives. So I was familiar with the town growing up. Only an hour out of the city, so commuting. And obviously I couldn't afford a house, or a huge apartment in the city, so this was the option. But yeah, there was one Mohawk iron worker left in the building when I left, and I don't know if he's still there or not.
What an incredible history. And I think what you're talking about, a lot of people don't know about that. And we have these conversations. I really like to move into your mom's work with the American Indian Community House in New York, and your role in that place, in which you've carried on this kind of legacy. Can you talk about her role, and then we can go from.
Yeah, I think a lot of what defines where I'm from or the person I am is the fact that so many of the formative years and even ongoing now have been part of the New York City Native community. And then growing up not knowing that wasn't normal, and then only realize, oh, things are a little different wherever you go. But it was a very supportive, very large community. And my mother and father both started working there in the 76, 77. My parents divorced. He stopped working there, but she stayed, and eventually, she stayed for over 40 years, and 35 of that as the executive director. So, at its height, it, employed about 38 people. It was getting several federal grants and millions of dollars per year. And it was just a great place for social services, help with finding jobs, cultural aspects, the arts, obviously New York City had a lot of native artists, performing artists, all kinds of media, just because it seemed to be a place where, a lot of people, and even before the 70s would come to live. So that was a big part of the community house growing up in the community. The Thunderbird American Indian Dancers, I grew up, in that as a kid, and then, ended up going to Japan with them, Kevin and I, in the 90s. So, it was just I can't imagine if I grew up somewhere else, it wouldn't have been so many different opportunities and exciting, fun things. It was also a great place to play at as a kid. Mm-hmm. Kevin and I would have, water gun fights, and, a bunch of kids, not just Kevin and I.
Right.
I get how that was probably annoying to the employees now that I'm a little older, but it was a lot of fun as a kid. We would climb in the roof. We had, on 14th Street, we had the top floor of a building that also had a small workshop on the roof. But it was, it was huge. It was a large space, and there were all these, places you can hide in and get in trouble in, and accidentally put your foot through the ceiling or the floor into someone's office when you're,
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun stuff. As a kid, again, I don't know how the staff felt about it, but as a kid.
Well, I find I've always brought my children everywhere, and I always went everywhere with my parents. That's just kind of how we do things. And I think it's very different when we think about the typical corporate world. But I think when you're around a lot of Native people, there's just this understanding you're an extension, your family is an extension of you, and we have to make this work. I think that happens often, but probably not often enough. But
I agree.
Yeah. And I remember, we didn't go often, but I remember going to the community house, and it was really great to be able to connect with people. And it was interesting because it's other New York Native people who live in and around New York City, but then there were always people coming in and out from other regions.
Yeah, that's right.
So it was really wonderful to have that opportunity in and around New York City. And what is your experience when you talk to people about the community house and basically growing up in that space, and you must know everybody, right?
Yeah.
But so when you meet someone outside of, maybe a non-Native person, and they're kind of surprised that Native people live in New York City, people are always surprised by that.
Right.
What is your reaction?
Yeah, I just filled them in, and you explain why. It's one of the biggest, urban populations, and obviously it's one of the biggest cities in the country. There's more opportunities for whatever fields people are in, and so that's why they reach there. And again, the long history, it didn't just start 20 years ago. Native people have been going there for the last 100 years, not longer, and played big roles in building the city. The ironworker, Mohawks being ironworkers, it wasn't just Mohawks, but mostly, but there were still a lot of Native people. Men and women. When I lived in Brooklyn, there was, Native women who were ironworkers as well.
Right.
So the city was how it looks, I guess, the landscape of it, there's a Native impact on that in some ways, major way. I don't, can be debated, but a lot of, work. And I know with Silver Cloud, I got to travel a lot across the country. We even got to go to Alaska, and I would always meet somebody who knew my mother. And it was just, I guess I sort of know, she does a lot of work and it's important, but to always hear the impact that people, again, not me, it was all, they were all very appreciative of the guidance or help that when passing through New York that my mother gave, or maybe they worked there for a year, then, went back to their homes. But, we have, I think I have it here somewhere, but we were at a powwow. I mentioned that, oh, I'm Lance, Rosemary Richmond's my mother.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, they told me a story. I said, yeah, she's living with me. She's having some trouble, walking, now she's retired. And then the next day, the woman, this is Fairbanks, came back with this cane that she, carved. Like, here, this is for you to bring back to your mother. So it was very, and I told that story. My mother retired. That the impact is, we may not realize it in our day to day, every day, getting in the subway, going to work and stuff like that. But to see the results, that how it ripples, so far away is important. And,
Definitely.
And hopefully continues. But
well, let's talk about your work there now.
Yeah. So for the last 8 years, I've been on the board. So, I guess that's not as long as most people are. Some people. So I've always been involved with the community house, but sort of just, not on the board wise. It was working because I knew that it takes a lot of work to be a board member, as I've learned. It's not just an hour meeting once a month.
Right. It's a huge commitment.
Yeah. So
if you do it right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then because of the importance of the work that we do, it's hard not to, do the extra time. You could just show up for a meeting.
Right.
But there's always, there's never enough hours. And, growing up watching my mother working 12 hours a day, just as the norm, and making sacrifices to her, then to me as well. Like, Kevin and I would want to go somewhere for the weekend. And she's like, well, I have to work, or, we can't use the community house car because that's only for work. Back when they, the GSA would provide the community house with a car. Again, we were teenagers. So stuff like that didn't make sense. We're like, why can't we go to, Rye Playland or something like that? But now that we're older, it makes sense. Or,
well, you understand that what she was doing, what she was building, and how important her work was. And I had this conversation with somebody yesterday who doesn't know my work, but was saying like, well, why is it important to you? And I couldn't even, I think, and I brought up the point that like, as people of color, as brown people, like we're born with this kind of huge responsibility anyway. And it's just like part of your life, right? And I just feel like I'm attached to my work. I can't even imagine what your mother must have felt being solely responsible for such a huge organization and that many staff members and that many families who need to put food on the table. That's an incredible weight.
Right.
But
I took that for granted as a kid.
Well, you're a kid. That's your mom, right? Yeah. I get that. You mentioned Silver Cloud Singers, and I'd love if you talk to tell the audience more about the group and how it came to be, and some of your experiences.
Sure. So Kevin and I grew up around the area, dancing, singing, going to powwows. Again, his uncle was Louis Mofsey, so my mother and Louis were best friends, so they grew up as kids. Then obviously we grew up as part of it. So that
and we were best friends, right? For those who don't know.
Yes. Yeah. Right, and Kevin's mother is part of that. Miriam Miguel, they were all, Grace Valdez from Shinnecock. They were a core group from their young age. In fact, my grandmother, my mother's mother, and Kevin's grandmother were friends.
Oh my goodness!
Not from a young age, I don't think, but they met in the city as that's sort of the common thread or common story of natives coming, and then that's sort of where it started. Going back to the 30s or so. So. But so, we were singing with the Thunderbirds or just not singing, just dancing. But Kevin, again, as has been a common thread through my life, Kevin had the vision and the drive to create something. And he wanted to create a drum named after his mother, who passed away when we were very young. So that was Silver Cloud. And it started out, a lot smaller than it ended up being. Preston Topahote, Randy Whitehead was involved. Daryl Swift was involved. Some guys that were only there in the beginning, or some of those guys were in the armed services, so they would obviously not be around
Right.
every weekend. They're off protecting, defending the country. So,
Right.
but it was less serious, I guess, in the beginning. I mean, we were thinking, we never, besides just going around within an hour of where we lived, wherever powwows we would go
But
to.
was the plan always to go to powwows and start performing professionally, or was it as more of a just, wanting to come together as community and be able to sing when you wanted to sing?
Yeah, well, I think for Kevin, he was singing every day, regardless. I mean, I remember, again, and going to say this a lot, but a lot of my childhood was spent at Kevin's house, or he wasn't at my house, in New Jersey, his house in New Jersey. And he would, from, I don't know, 5, he was singing in the bed, like nonstop. If he was in a shower, he was singing. He was constantly, so, and I was, to me, it wasn't a focus of mine. It wouldn't have been if Kevin didn't drive me there. I think, it'd be more a casual thing. So I think it was, I think it maybe started casually, and it was really just where we're going to these events every weekend anyway to dance. So let's think. It was serious in the sense that because it was named after his mother, we paid a lot of respect to it, and still do. And, and then it just, I like to refer to Kevin as like Prince, and we're Revolution, and those guys are a great band. And I actually went and saw them after Prince's death in a concert, because it's still the music, Yeah, he's not there, but it was still great. So, and while they're great, it's not the same without Prince, right? So, he was always the driving force of that. He's the one that forced, there were times as things got serious, right? Like Smithson became a big thing around here, and competitions got a little more. So we would practice all the time, and every week sometimes for most of the season. But it made us all better singers. And again, there are a lot of people that sing with us. Brandon Tubby and George Stonefish. Guys like Don Dreyer. Right now we have Travis Richardson is our lead, is taking over in Kevin's reigns. But yeah, it's really grown a lot from where it once was, and the fact that it stayed for 30 years.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's like, wow, I thought it just felt like it just started.
Wow.
2 weeks ago. But yeah, we got to do some great things. I made some notes I wouldn't forget. So we went to Brazil with Silver Cloud. So again, thanks to Kevin. There's a festival there called Perkpan, which is like percussionists from all over the world. So we were there for a week, dancers too. His brother, Michael and Dee Dee were also founding members. And Dee Dee was with us in Brazil. It was a good time. It was, we had got to go to the beach, and just really, we had, people like take us around and show us a good time in between. I think we only performed twice. We were there for a week, but it was a great experience with, drummers from Japan, drummers from South Africa. It was, so as a percussionist, that was interesting to see, because I realized, I guess that's what I'm called now, a percussionist. But to see how there's similarities and differences, it was pretty educational and enlightening on my part. We also got to go to Alaska, as I mentioned. That was, because of Silver Cloud. We opened up once for Midnight Oil, and then it was us, and Jonah Osborne, before she was famous, opened up, like, she went first, we went second, and then Midnight Oil. Obviously, we're not as big as any of those people, but it's nice to say. And it was, it was cool. Also, there was this band, I can't think of it. There was one of the actors in Oz had a heavy rock band, and he had us come out and do a concert, which was pretty wild.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Because that was like, the crowd's not there for us or even knows who we are. They're there for you know, Biohazard. That's the name of the band.
Right, but I'm sure they completely appreciated you and didn't know what was coming.
Yeah. Well, not right away because they're like, we want
Oh,
Biohazard,
were
and I get that.
they?
But he came out. He's like, whoa. He's like, these guys are the original, alternative music, and
Yeah.
so it was just a great experience. It was very weird because you're in basically it's not Madison Square Garden, but it's a huge arena, and it was interesting. We did do Madison Square Garden for there was a native boxer one year, and so we performed for that boxer who, unfortunately, by the time we finished singing, got to our seats, the fight was already over. He was not. So, but it was a great experience, and I'm sure he did better the next time. And we also did the WNBA games. They had us come out 2 years in a row for Native Appreciation Day at halftime. So those were nice. Again, great experiences. I since his passing, I say there are so many communities and so many experiences that I would have never encountered if it wasn't for Kevin and Silver Cloud. What happened to that. So yeah, I mean, I think we've now when we go around the country, most people, depending on the age, right, older people as old as us are aware of Silver Cloud. Maybe the younger generation isn't as aware. And we don't travel as much. We used to go to Denver, March, and stuff like that when we were in our 20s, I guess. Yeah, I think once we got to our 30s, we'd stop doing that. But really wanted to and talked about it. We just, it was hard to arrange those trips.
I want to talk more about that, but we're going to take a quick break and we'll get back to our convo with Lance Richmond when we come back.
Take me out one more time is all you said to me. And I swore I heard.
We're back on Usula Media. This is Rise and Thrive with Tylena Goyo, and I'm here today with Lance Richmond. And we were just talking about the Silver Cloud Singers and all the incredible travels you've had and experiences with the group. And I would love it if you could tell us your vision for the future and how you plan on honoring Kevin's memory.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the family, plays more role in that. Muriel, Josephine, and I know they were talking about doing something in May, which would be the 1-year anniversary. So I think the details on what that is and how that's going to work is still coming. Yeah, and how we're going to proceed if Silver Cloud, and if we're going to do that, that's still up, in the air. Obviously, we haven't done anything for the past year,
right?
Because to honor Kevin. Again, it was COVID, so there weren't we didn't really miss a lot of powwows, but that, regardless of that, it was very clear we haven't been singing, and I haven't sang at all since then, and I won't.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's to be determined. We're going to see what happens. I mean, to be very honest, I'm sure this is the case for everyone. I can't imagine what it would be like to sit at a drum and not with Kevin to be there. I mean, there's only we would have jobs, like 2 jobs on the same weekend, occasionally, a few times a year maybe. So we would split our crews to go to different jobs. And I always mentioned to Kevin, I had a little pull considering how long I've known him and all the secrets I have of him. I want to when you do that, I want to be on the crew that you're.
He's on.
If we could, it wasn't always possible, sometimes, but so yeah, I mean, but it's whatever they decide. If we keep going, and we support Travis and as the head of Silver Cloud going forward, I'm going to do the best I can to support that. But it is going to be obviously emotional the first couple of times. Maybe it will. I hope things get back to normal. It's just going to be hard.
I feel like you have such a rich history there that it feels like there should be a documentary or a book or something to.
Well, I was thinking of that. I mean, the only Silver Cloud, the Kevin Tarrant story or something like that. Beyond that, no ideas. But what I've been talking to the guys is just let's start jotting down memories, for the last 30 years, because we don't really have a calendar. I think in the very beginning with websites, I created a website for Silver Cloud and it had a calendar. So we had like 3 years of like where we went every weekend, because I do not remember. And I don't remember we went 2 years ago. So
you were so busy. I mean, you were going nonstop. Plus, you were working full time. I mean, you have all this other stuff going on.
Right. So those memories, even it doesn't have to be related to Silver Club. But what were we doing and where were we? We'll try to backtrack and figure out what year that was. But I would like to have even just if it's a document of the history of Silver Cloud, and it's just for us so that we can go back and now I remember that, and in a way that's keeping some of that history alive, because if we get older and forget it and it's not written down, then no one
Right.
will know what ever happened.
Right. I think even if it's not something formal, but just having it in a Google folder or something, just people adding pictures and notes and things like that.
Yeah.
And maybe one day somebody will formalize it.
Yeah.
But speaking of documentaries, I'd love to shift and talk about your film work. And let's start with It Can't Rain All the Time, which was sponsored by the community house, right?
Yeah, they produced it.
Yeah. How did you come to create that project?
Sure. So again, this starts with the community again, because I was surrounded by so many talented performing artists, who have decades of history in New York. Again, Spider Woman Theater.
Yeah.
Miriam Miguel.
I mean, you had a power cast in that.
Yeah. Well, because they, right. I just said, hey, we're going to do this. Will you come help me? And they said yes. So, it was almost
Very
like
nice.
I had very little to do with a lot of that. But, and just speaking about Kevin again, like his daughter is amazing. She was on Broadway,
Brilliant.
a lot of other, Native people in that performance with G-Jack. Muriel Borst, who's great in It Can't Rain All the Time, but again, was one of my best friends growing up, and all the, fun and trouble we got into. She's obviously a great, playwright and actress of herself. And I want to give a shout out to the Safe Harbors Theater Festival they did virtually this year, but started last year, which I saw in person a month before the pandemic started.
Yeah.
And the fact they were able to do it again with everything going on and with Kevin's passing is,
Yes.
is a miracle in itself. And that's an important legacy. And so having those people all within arm's reach was, it was a benefit that most people don't have. So I realized how very lucky I was. And basically it just started with me, as I had an idea. After I graduated from UConn, I was, I think even while in UConn, because I did some classwork on it. It was basically simple. Like Native youth are like 5 times more likely to commit suicide, become, or die of alcoholism. And it's just something I learned, I think, in one class. There was actually some good professors at UConn, who were actually friends with my stepmother, Trudy. So I guess they were woke about Native issues. So there were some good conversations that I guess started there. Again, when you grow up in it, you grow up in New York, you're not thinking about those things like that. You're just living and being a teenager. Then you go to college, but then things as an adult start to be an adult. You're more aware of the facts and the serious issues that face, our families. Not just in New York, but everywhere. So I wrote something that tried to address that in a way that was a little more, I was seeing things like in general, like you see things about, suicide, but they're not really, I don't know. What's the commercial they did with the egg, like,
The eggs, yeah, this is your brain,
Right.
on drugs.
So I think that was
It's not
catchy.
very accessible, right?
Right. for youth. It's made accessible for older people because it's catchy and we remember it, right? So in a way,
Right.
that was effective.
That's
But I
true.
don't think it ever
It
made
didn't,
someone say, "Oh, wait, maybe I should
right.
reach out for help." So, and not that I would know how either, but I just thought, growing up, Kevin and I would see movies every day during the summer. Back when you could like pay to go into one and then go
And
into,
then just go to the other ones.
Times Square. Like, my mother was working at the community house, so we had a lot of free time and we get, so we loved watching movies. So I thought there's got to be a more entertaining way to address this issue. So that's how it started. And again, a lot of help. I did help write one of the grants that funded most of it, but my mother having great connections, there was Ramin Naami was the producer who directed the first Eulalie video, Follow Your Heart's Desire, prior to, me, I think a couple years before. So because he has the experience as a filmmaker himself, and he already helped the community house, he was the producer, and basically this is how you do things and this is how you hire, So, in a way, it was for me, I'm sure, a lot easier because I had so many people to rely on. And one of the scenes in there, we were trying to recreate a powwow, and we did it in the circle of the community house that back in then was huge. I mean, I don't know if you remember, on the second floor of Lafayette in 4th Street, they had a huge space that was the entire length of the building.
Yeah.
And a big portion of that was a circle, which we would use like for any gathering or events or plays. So we just made that into a powwow, and it was big enough, but there were so many community members. I mean, there was, I don't know, like 30 people showed up. So it was very easy to create that environment because almost the size of what a social would have been.
Great.
Yeah. So, that, and then when that was done, about a year later, Tony Hunter, who was the head of IHS at Community House, he's from Shinnecock. He was been working with Vera and Hortensia Colorado on the Quality Theater Company. Again, another great institution in New York that, I just grew up being around. And I should also say that I saw the very first performance of Spider-Woman Theater at the Community House on 38th Street when I was 10.
Wow.
And, so
It's incredible.
when you see like things like that all the time, it's not so unimaginable that you could, oh, well, maybe I'll do something.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if I just grew up, you wouldn't see it. That's not possible. How can I make even a short film,
But you were immersed in it, and you had so many talented people around you that it just
exactly. Yeah.
And the other thing is not just the talent, but the drive. I mean, everybody who you're talking about is so driven to make things happen, and opportunities are not always available to us, and we have to make them for ourselves. And so we're just kind of in that mind frame anyway of, well, it doesn't exist, or I'm not going to be cast in this mainstream Hollywood thing, or we need to make our own, right? And so we just do it. And so, yeah, it's incredible. I'm just really impressed. And you posted it last year or something, and I watched it, and it was great. It was really wonderful. And you're right, there were a ton of people who worked on it, and that just shows how strong the community was and how much everybody was willing to step out and support.
Yeah, we filmed the exterior shots and some of the interior shots on Shinnecock at Grace Valdez's house, Chi-Chi, Thunderbird, Hale's house. Again, they offered their homes for us to bring in, 8 or 9 people and
so
disrupt their house for a couple days.
That's a lot to offer up. Yeah.
So, I'm still grateful. Again, I don't, I only, for those 2 years, I did some of that work, those 2 productions. I don't consider myself a filmmaker. I just had something I felt needed to be said. And that was, I was lucky to have the talent in the media, that as an option. And with the second one, A Traditional Kind of Woman, it was already a play directed by, Vera and Hortensia. Because of my experience from the first one, I was able to produce it. Like, well, this is how we hire cast. This is how we can do this, and this is how we do the sound mixing. This is how we get it a finished product, and we did that production on 16 millimeter. Um, so that was a little bit of different process for me, but again, it's because we have a recording of those things versus the plays that they did. Once they stopped doing them, you would never see it again. So I'm grateful for that, and they have a copy of their their film that they can use as much and often as they want. Both produced by the community house, so thank you to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. Why, you said you don't consider yourself a filmmaker and you continued on to do other work. Why did you feel like you didn't want to continue on in film? And yeah, and then I wanted you to share about the work that you do now because it's interesting.
Sure. That's very good. You're very good at this.
Thanks.
I mean, I did have other ideas after those two productions, but back in the mid 90s, it was still hard. It was a very expensive endeavor. So I guess in that sense, I didn't pursue it as much because it seemed, it would take too much time or too hard, and I don't know if it was a decision I made one night. It was just working full time. And during the second production, I was working, for a busy job. So it was hard to do that. Like I'd have to do the editing at night, work during the day. And, that was 6 months that were very, it was like if you could get 6 hours of sleep. But I knew it was hard. And as my jobs got more harder, took up more time, my focus, and that's a problem. Obviously, we can't do what we want to do every day. We have to balance our work lives.
And it's not always just a set decision. It's just kind of life takes over and you're like, oh, I really would love to do that. But then you get busy with everything else. We have to take a quick break. But when we come back, we'll talk more about what you're doing now and what you're thinking about for the future. Okay. This is Tylena Goyo on Rise and Thrive.
Take me out one more time is all you said to me. And I swore I heard.
And we're back on Rise and Thrive on Usula Media. And I'm here with Lance Richmond. And we were just talking about a couple of films that Lance wrote and directed. And then we're talking about life and how it kind of sometimes goes in a direction that maybe you didn't expect. So what are you doing now? I know that you work as IT manager at Columbia University and been doing that for 20 years.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a bit about that. And then also how you incorporate, I know it's COVID now, like it's the pandemic and we're all still kind of quarantined, but how before that and after that, you incorporate all the other things that you do. You're very busy.
Right. I mean, so yeah, I've been at Columbia for 20 years in IT. I've worked at 3 different places there, maybe more, no, 3. So the jobs have always been a little different, which is good, I guess. Obviously I like it. I've been there for 20 years. I got Kevin a job there. He worked there about 4 or 5 years before he moved on to different, better jobs. But so great, benefits, and it was easy. Again, living in the Brooklyn, it was about a 45-minute train ride but it's now only like an hour train ride from here. So even though I'm much farther away, it still works. So my current job, I love the group I work with. It's very supportive, so I could see myself staying there as long as they'll have me.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And it's in technology, which in the 90s was sort of new. I mean, like there was no personal computers when we were in college. You had to go somewhere.
You had to go to a place.
Or you had those typewriters or automatic typewriters.
Yeah.
So, I sort of learned that in the 90s after college. Again, part of that was related to my interest in games, video games. but you had to learn how to twerk the computer for every different game back then. So that gave me the experience, and it sort of served as my way to start small and keep, going bigger and bigger in technology. And I do have an interest in technology, and it's fun. Most people do. So I just been lucky to sort of be able to figure out how to fix things. Now I'm not as hands-on as I used to be. I just work with a great team of people who are, and I sort of manage the VIP customers at Columbia. So that's starting with the president of the university. And I worked in that office for 10 years, so I have some experience in doing that. Before I was in the president's office, and I went to the group I am now, Central, that serves a lot of people throughout the university. So it's more relationships. You manage your relationships and just making sure everyone, gets service as fast as they can, and stuff like that. Which again has been, in COVID, has been something we all sort of gotten to become aware of. How do you use Zoom? How do you work remotely? Stuff like that. So yeah, we were working 12-hour days when we first went home.
Wow.
Because we had, the whole university went home of 10,000 people. And a lot of those people never really needed to work from home or didn't have a computer, or, didn't know how to
get everybody set up.
Yeah, exactly. So it was very busy, but, after a month, then we had to teach people how to use Zoom. But now it's everything seems to be smoothly,
Mm-hmm.
So it was
So
fun.
I can only imagine, and all the unknowns of, where are we headed? Why, how long is this going to last, and all these things. And I think it was interesting, before the show started, we were talking about what it looks like in going forward, in terms of, will we all be going back to the office? Will we be having a lot more in-person meetings, or is this kind of the normal culture now? What do you think about that?
I don't think that anything's going to be the same as it was. I think companies are realizing they don't necessarily have such a huge footprint, physical footprint, and the costs involved with that.
Like flying across the country for a meeting.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Right. That too. I didn't even think of that. Like Zoom is now so common that, it's obviously it's not the same as in a person-to-person meeting, but does it justify the $5,000
Right.
there?
Yeah.
And does it justify us paying, $1 million on rent for, 5 floors of a building when we could just keep one? So I don't know what's going to happen at Columbia. I think it's still, they're still, as in every organization, figuring out. But I would imagine there'd be more, or at least, maybe for the next couple of years, even though everyone gets the vaccine and it seems safer, there may be some caution and things move back slower, meaning
Right.
people work half time on site, stuff like that.
Yeah. I know, I think we're all going to be super awkward when we get back in person. I don't know how we're going to act with each other. I feel like Zoom has created this very odd, it's a wonderful resource, but it's also really odd, because you have to like stop talking and then leave space so that you're not stepping on someone else. And there's all these new things, and we act differently now. Yeah. And how you have to make your kind of acknowledgements bigger.
Yeah.
We're all just going to be a bunch of weirdos out in person.
It probably will take a year or two for us to figure it out.
Get back to like what we used to be, and maybe we won't get back to that. Maybe we'll be better.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we can dream, right?
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
So you're saying that you don't travel as much, and you hadn't traveled as much, but when you think about like powwows, and I think a lot of us are just like really missing that kind of just being together and dancing and music and just all of that. It's just the soul of it, right? So
yeah, when you do it every weekend, you sort of take it for granted as
we got to go do this, wake up at 5 a.m, blah blah blah.
Right.
And now it's like, oh, can we please?
Right. Yeah. So, with Kevin, that was never an issue. He was every weekend, he was ready.
Oh, he was there.
But to be honest, and he knows this, and the guys, anyone who in the earshot, of me knows that I'd be like, oh, I'd rather, this is going to be tough. It would be great to not, get some weekends off
Right.
or as many as I could.
Right.
So, yeah, but then now that it is gone and, the appreciation to get back to do that, it just, whatever that takes. I don't know what that's going to take for us, but even just to be there, 10 years from now, what will I be doing? I don't know, but I'll certainly be there in some sense.
Right. Right. Yeah. Looking forward is very exciting. I'm really happy that we got to chat today. It's been really wonderful to touch on all the things that you've done throughout your career. And we still have a few minutes left. So I want to talk about, I guess we explored being a Native person in New York City. I would love it if you could give me your perspective on when you travel outside of the East Coast, how other Native people interact with you, and are they just as surprised that there's a thriving community of Native people on the East Coast and in New York City?
Yeah, that's been the experience, more so than not. Obviously, the people who've ever been to the New York, are aware of it. But I would say the majority on first meeting someone was surprised. And there was that commercial for some salsa about being
New York City, that one.
So that was the second thing that you would hear.
They would say that to you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a polite way, and they would be funny. And then we'd start conversations, and then within a few hours, they would get it, and I would think going forward, they would now know. Oh yeah, I met those guys from New York City.
Like instead of othering you, like, oh, you're not legit or you're not enough or whatever. Once they got to know who you were and understood.
Right. No, I guess I've been lucky, and so yeah, I think no one, maybe they had that thought initially, but within a few minutes, that would, I think that would melt away. I think when they would hear us singing or hear more specifically hear Kevin's lead, that sort of ended any.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's so interesting because it's definitely a conversation with non-natives, but it also the fact that it is a conversation with Native folks and being so surprised that there's so much population density of Native people in New York City is really interesting to me that there's so little knowledge of that.
Yeah.
Like, unless, like you said, that people have been to New York and then they've experienced it.
Because I know there's so many, I would say, just as a large population that's lived here all these years has come and gone. Like there are people who come for school, then they're here for 4 years and then they go back to their communities, or they're here for a job for a few years, and then we also know there's a group of Native people that would never, make it to the community house initially, if their stay was only a year or so. And they, again, they're busy with normal day-to-day stuff and then they go home. And I think that still exists, people coming in and then leaving. But yeah, I would think that they'd be talking about, they're obviously their families. Oh yeah, my son went to college in New York City. So I think they know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, again, this, when we were, 30s, 40s, the last 20 years, it was happening. It happened less and less. Mm-hmm. I don't know, people were being polite to me and what they were thinking internally was different. But but we also, with Silver Clouds, has been around for so long,
right?
Year after year after year, which is really what, there's a difference. There, a lot of drum groups get together for a year or two or move. So I think that helps because it was, we only went around the country for a few years.
Yeah.
Then, people would know us for a couple of years after, but then they'd forget. And then, so that was part of Kevin's drive to always keep us out there as many weekends as we could. Certainly around here locally or within 3 hours drive, but even beyond that.
Yeah, he and I were talking about working at doing something for Seeds, and that was kind of in the long-term planning in Santa Fe with Muriel as well. And I always love that. I love that Kevin had that vision, and make sure that there's that visibility and that there's that representation happening. And I think it makes a huge difference. And you're right, you had such a strong reputation and you're an amazing group. And so being out there really does have an impact. And yeah, I mean, thank you for all the work that you've done. Cause
Yeah.
it's like you said, it's kind of what you do. It's what you grew up in. It's the people you know and everybody's doing. And you forget that it does have this ripple effect and it is really powerful. But you know, to us, it's kind of just like, well, I'm doing this work today, right? It's not like, oh yeah, I'm changing the world or whatever. It's just
Right,
like,
exactly.
I do this work. I enjoy it. I'm with the people I love. I'm making beautiful things. And, you know, so thank you for your incredible work and your incredible service. I'm so happy that I've been able to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would say a lot of that also is owed to Kevin and his family on keeping, guys like me and the other guys on the right road all those years.
Yeah.
Who knows where we would have ended up without his guidance. And all the other, again, Spider Woman Theater people, they're known throughout the world and have before I was,
Yes.
born.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that also should apply to, like, they're from New York City and they're part of that legacy as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. It's amazing. There's so much and it's so rich. And if anybody's out there listening, do yourself a favor and start digging and finding out the richness of the Native community in New York City and surrounding areas.
Yeah.
I guess we're going to go. I think we're wrapping up. So
thank you.
I really want to thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you enjoy your weekend.
Likewise, you too. Thanks.
Thank you, Lance. This is Tylin on Rise and Thrive on Usla Media. Join me next week when I speak with artist Jason Weesaw. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Take me out one more time is all you said to me.